David, hello. How are you?
Hello, Stuart. How are you?
Doing amazing. Doing amazing. It's good to see you. Melissa, hello. How are you?
Hello, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome.
Very,
Hey,
very formal of you, Stu, to
well, sometimes I
individually
just like get after it in like
salutate.
informal ways. I was gonna get a little formal today.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I think we should formalize. We should professional this thing up. We should church it up a bit.
Yeah, I think so. I was
It's good.
wondering, my family and I were talking about Halloween costumes, what we're gonna be this year. We're still trying to figure it out. Melissa, I was wondering, do you do like a family theme for Halloween? Like, do you like kind of all get together and do kind of the same thing, or is it like a free for all?
I love doing family themed costumes. As my kids
Yeah,
are
that's kind
getting
of what I
older,
figured.
it's been a little bit harder. So at least some members of the family are themed, even if there's some that decide they have to go rogue that year.
It's funny you say that because my son, he's 6. He always wants to be the one who goes rogue. Like we were, um, for us, it's always like a Disney theme because my daughter just, always wants to go Disney, and like it'd be, you know, Little Mermaid and then the ninja. Like we're all Little Mermaid costumes, and then there's a ninja, right? It's
Ninja.
it's always like something. David, do you even dress up for Halloween?
Yeah, of course. But I want to make sure, Melissa, you understand. So when Stu's family goes to Little Mermaid, Stu is actually the Little Mermaid. Like he demands being
Oh,
the primary
cute.
No, dude,
role. Like
I
he
was
loves
King Neptune. King
the
Neptune,
princess
dude.
role. I think one year he was Elsa. So no judgment. It's just Stu likes to be the kind of the
No,
star of
I
the
was
show, and he's
Kristoff. I
typically
was
a
Kristoff.
a, a princess. No, I just want to be. I've been wanting a gorilla suit for like 10 years. I just want to be a gorilla every year. But no, we tend to theme it up. I think this year might be the Incredibles. That's what
The
we might be
Incredibles.
going with. So, but
Nice.
Melissa, this entire podcast is going to be about Halloween and costumes and how you and your business really focus around the month of October. And this is
I
like your
love
primary month.
Halloween. I
Halloween's
could
great.
probably do that.
Halloween is
So,
great.
to continue on this theme, I thought it was really interesting. I was a chaperone for my first graders field trip, and I was asking all the kids in our little group in our van, and I asked the kids like what they were gonna wear, and one of the kids was said he's six, first grader. He's like, I'm gonna be Pennywise from the movie It. I was like, Have you seen the movie It? He's like, Yeah, I've seen it lots of times. I was like, What? What? Like that's scary. Like I get scared from that movie. And Wells, my son, was like, What's that?" It's like, "Oh, it's just a scary clown." And he kept on asking over and over again, like, "What's Pennywise? Like, what does he look like?" I was like, "I'm not going to show you any pictures. It's all good." He literally has a nightmare that night just
Dang.
by talking about a scary clown in this movie. And I'm like, how is this 6-year-old watching movies like that and then dressing up for a costume like that? It was crazy to me. I don't know. That's just my story. That there's nothing to that beyond just this
Well, and I
a
think
funny
where
story.
this is appropriate and where I think we'll lead into is family culture is a big part of, when you talk about your program and we'll get into family brand, but specifically the Family Brand Academy and the expected outcomes from that. Like I was really fascinated by the three outcomes, one being family culture, but I think that plays directly into culture, right? I think it plays into the culture of your family on what you do, what you don't do, expectations, and what's allowed and what's celebrated, what's not, right? And I think I'm really, really interested to diving into that because you specifically say that family culture is created by design, not default. And so I
Mhm.
think these are things that we should be very, very intentional with and understand. But before we do that, Melissa, tell us about you. Tell us about Family Brand and give us some background.
Yeah, thank you. Uh I live in Arizona. I'm married to my husband Chris. We've been married almost 20 years in a couple months here, and we have 5 kids, ages 7 to 17. And in a nutshell, like these could be long stories, each of them individually, but Chris and I, when we were married 4 years, we found ourselves separated and headed towards divorce. And we had our first two little boys at the time. And we realized like, okay, this isn't just going to be a fairy tale where we live happily ever after. Like this is going to require work. This is going to require a lot more intention and vision than we maybe originally thought. And so I think that was like the first little start of this family brand journey where we realized like ultimately we do want to have this family together. We do want to do what's required to make this work. But we didn't just want to make it work and suffer through the next few years until the kids, graduated. But it was like, how can we make this marriage like really beautiful, and this family everything that we dream of and that we want? And then, fast forward a few years, my husband has a coaching consulting company, and he mostly he coaches like small businesses and entrepreneurs. And he came home one day and he said, "Hey, people are giving me feedback that my process is giving them more clarity in their business than they've ever had. And it's giving them direction for the next 100 years for their business." He's like, "I think that'd be cool if we did that for our family. Let's take our family through my process." And I'm the wife of an entrepreneur, so I'm used to like ideas coming all the time and me like jumping on board and being like, "Okay, yeah, let's do it." So we did a little offsite, I guess you could call it, with our kids. We had 5 kids at that point, so a little offsite with them, kind of going through his process at their level. And afterwards, he was like, "We just branded our family. Isn't that cool?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's super cool." And he started talking about this idea to people, in his entrepreneur circles. We ended up hosting like a workshop, I guess you could call it, about family, how to create your own family brand. And then that was the birth of it. And then I think it was kind of handed to me in a sense when, as my youngest was getting a little bit older, I found myself wondering, I think as many moms do, that I've talked to, as your kids are getting older, it's like, okay, what is my next thing? I'd used to work as a nurse. I'd stepped out of nursing for a long time to be a stay-at-home mom, but it's like, what is my next thing? And I felt this like really clear, strong impression as I was praying one day that like family brand is mine, and it's mine to lead, and it's mine to take out to the world and like build strong families. And I've been so blessed to be able to do that, the last several years.
I love that. My wife, we're in a similar place with ages a little bit, more compressed, but so she decided that she wanted to buy a gym. And so that like completely all in, mom boss, lady boss. And it's awesome. So I commend you on that.
Cool.
One question, and you talked about it, I actually wrote this down as a question because I think a lot of people get stuck in it. But in your, I think it's on the about page when you talk about you and your husband, Chris, you mentioned almost, you said specifically almost divorced to family design. And I'm just curious, I think a lot of people get stuck in the almost divorce and divorce phase. And a lot of people do, you described it, they do push through. They push through for many years until potentially, I was just talking to a buddy the other day that, once they all went off to college and their parents divorced, and it was like, oh man, they were just holding on. And I imagine the environment, the culture wasn't what they desired, or what, my buddy now desires for his family. But I'm just curious, how did you, if you don't mind giving insight, how do people push through that to get to this other place, right? Like, how do you, because I think so many, especially around our age, it's midlife, you kind of get stuck in that and really push through for the kids, but not taking the time to develop the relationship and not taking the time to actually thrive in the marriage instead of looking at just the whole house and be like, okay, we'll stay together for the kids.
Yeah, I think it's such a big question, and I do have some thoughts and answers that I've both seen and experienced myself. And that is, I think first it has to start with you individually, whether that's, the husband or the wife, or both of you individually. Like, what do you want? And how can you go on your own journey to find like what brings meaning and joy to my life? And it can't be about like the other person needing to change, or the other person, if they would just do this, then I would be happy. It's like, can we go on this personal, I'm going to call it personal development journey. Sometimes that word, people don't like it, but this own journey of developing myself. And then as I become the person that I want to be, most of the times I've seen that lead to like, okay, we both can become, then if we're both being the best versions of ourselves, when we come together, like that builds a more powerful team. And that usually I found leads to more fulfillment. When you're fulfilled personally, then you can be more fulfilled, in your relationship, in your marriage. And it's not always the case, but for us, that has been the journey. And for many families, it's like, okay, I can't put my happiness on him, and it can't be contingent on him changing or being different. It all starts with me. And
Yeah, I
then
love that.
thank you. And then the other thing I think is really bringing attention to the relationship itself. And I also hear from families who have kids and, you know, they've been married a long time and maybe their kids are like 10 or 11 years old and they say, well, we're big proponents of like taking like an annual getaway with your partner, like without the kids. But I'll talk to families, couples all the time who are like, oh yeah, we've never done that. Our kids are 10 or 11, 12 or even older. And like, oh yeah, we've never done that. And I just think it feels like a miss to me. It feels like, you know, that relationship, that partnership between husband and wife, mom and dad is so important. And when that feels fulfilled and when that feels happy, like you bring so much more to the culture of the family and to your kids. I think there's so much more available to give. And it is hard though. Like I get it that it's hard to, when you're busy, to prioritize a day or two or longer away. And it's hard, like, okay, what about the finances? And what about just so many logistics? Who's going to watch the kids? But every time I've done that, it's reaped such great rewards. And I do see, like, it's hard when you're in the middle to look forward 18 years and see like there will be a time when our kids move out and it's going to be just you and I don't want to look at you and my husband and say like I don't even know you anymore. Like, do we even like each other anymore? I want to do the work now so that when we're in that place, like we already know and we're already like ready for what's next.
So good. And I'll tell you from firsthand experience, my side of the family and my wife's side of the family, both sets of parents divorced after we left the house, after we, went on to college. And
If
you
I
hear
could,
it all the time.
yeah. And if I could add to that, I actually had some great insight from a woman I had on my podcast, the Family Brand podcast, that I had never maybe realized before. And she's like, when the kids go out of the house, it's like so often the kids have been like the thing that you could just focus on
Yeah,
and you didn't
common.
have to like face what was going on between you. But it's like once that's removed, she's like, also it hits like usually a woman's like in the middle of perimenopause or menopause. She's like, that's tricky. Also, she may be struggling with her identity because the kids are out of the house now and her identity as mom is shifting. The husband is maybe at the height of his career and this like juxtaposition of these two things. And they're sometimes like super hard to navigate. So I totally, especially after hearing from her, totally can see how that happens and how it's easy to happen.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. I have, if we can take a step back, and I'm going to ask you to be a little bit vulnerable if you're willing to. What was it? What happened at, the 4-year mark of getting you guys close to divorce? Like what was it? Was it multiple things? Was it one thing? Was it money? Was it job? Was it career? Was it just different avenues of life? Like what happened?
I think it was all of those things
Yeah.
that you just mentioned.
Yes.
Um, yes. So if I drop back down into that time, I had just given birth to our second son. He truly was like 4 weeks old. And that, for any parent listening who's had children, if you remember that time, like it is, at least for me, every time, it's like such a transitional period where you're not sleeping. You're not probably connecting because every effort and intention is going to this little newborn. And so I think that was maybe just the catalyst for things that were already there that we maybe weren't paying attention to, which was it was definitely money. It was definitely like my husband's business. He was struggling like in his identity almost. It was like a business owner. Like what do I want to do? We were in our 20s then and it was still like, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I think also for me personally, I wasn't a great partner. I think I had been pouring all of my effort and attention into these two little babies. They're 18 months apart. And then also I don't think I know like who I was or what I wanted. I had just become like this. I don't even know how I would best describe it. I think I had become their mother and had lost sight of being anything other than that.
Yeah, I get it. And I think that that can happen very, very easily for either side, right? As man, the business owner, and finding just their sole identity there, or, you know, woman as the mom and finding their sole identity there. And even, we've seen as military guys, being in the military for 20 years, being the military officer or the Navy pilot or the commanding officer, like there's identity in those pieces. And as soon as that's removed, because they're going to all be removed at some point, you you go down this downhill stroke of like, what am I now? Who am I now? And it's a challenge that I think almost everyone goes through. And I think it's a big challenge for veterans military. And that's why I think veteran suicide is so high, is this identity piece. So what would you say to those who are struggling with that? Like how do they find a new identity? How do they get through that?
Yeah, this is so good. I love this conversation because I think it is something that, to one degree or another, that everyone does grapple with. And I think that for me, like, again, if I drop back down into that moment, I started, I put like big sheets of paper, like I had butcher paper for my oldest son to kind of scribble on.
Oh, yep.
And I like hung them on the wall. We had a spare bedroom. I hung them on the wall. Chris had moved out, and that just became like my space where I was like really examining, like, what do I like? Like, who am I? That was the time of blogs. So I would write down like, okay, these are the blogs that I like. And I'd write down, these are the songs that I like. This is the food that I like. And it sounds so silly, but I had lost touch with some of those things. And I think from there, then it was like, we have our family mission, I guess you could call it, which is, we believe you can be who you want to be. And so I think that is maybe the next thing, is it's like, at least for me, it was like, who do you want to be outside of those labels? Like, once those are stripped away, who do you want to be? And I think that's the cool thing about human life, human nature, is you can create yourself to be who you want to be. Like, and what does that next phase look like? Like, maybe this one chapter is closing, but what do you want the next chapter to look like? And it's really powerful to think like, I have control over that, over the next chapter.
I love that. And I think there's a direct tie to, excuse me, sorry about that. There's a direct tie to what we're talking about and what you do. And I want to highlight two things. One, this journey of self-discovery and self-awareness never ends. I learned something. I took an assessment a couple days ago, and I learned, and it said, how are you motivated? It's extrinsic, intrinsic, and altruistic. So extrinsic being like money motivated, you receive money. Intrinsic being more approval based, you're seeking approval. And then altruistic being, for in the context that I took the survey, that you serve God, like you serve others, and that's how you're motivated, and it's serving God. And I would have answered, oh yeah, totally altruistic. That's my heart. I love serving. I love Jesus. And the survey came back is like, nope, you're extrinsic. You're extrinsically motivated. And I was like, man, but what was good about that is it forced me to step back, and I really like dove into this and pray about it. And not that I'm trying to change what it is, more so I'm aware of it. And now I can explore my relationships with things like money and things like, my relationships with others. And I think the family branding piece and what you just described, the self-awareness, even the food you like, while it seems trivial, most men that we encounter, because they're not so focused on design, most of us are not focused on design in these areas of our life. There's a lot of self-awareness that can be gained, but also actions that can then be taken. And what I love about everything that, in that line of questioning in your answer is that you can do something about it, which is where, I think family brand comes in, is that's doing something about it. And so if you don't mind, talk us through that. And I also want to encourage one thing. I always tell my wife, I'm like, hey, if you want to be the sugar mama, like I'm totally down. Like with you, I will do the dad thing and the laundry and all the things and cook and all the things. You be the sugar mama. Like I'm totally down with that. So I just want to emphasize that I think there's some identity pieces that we can also really lean into and pour into and support. But all that being said, you know, the family brand, specifically family brand academy, and becoming a better parent, a better spouse, and building a stronger family, that mission, talk to us about that. Because I love how this is a very action oriented way to get after the things we've been talking about.
Yeah, we've, in full transparency, I've struggled with like, how do we capture what we do in a little tagline? Because it's hard to capture in a tagline. And that's where we landed. It's like a system to help you become a better parent, a better spouse, and build a stronger family. But it's really giving you the systems and the tools to know how to do it. We encounter a lot of families who, a lot of our clients are entrepreneurs actually. And so they own their own business. They're very successful, but it's like some of those same processes and systems, they don't know how to implement them into their families. And I actually love showing them that a lot of the same processes that you're using in business, you can actually tweak and use in your family, such as like developing your people, for example. This is kind of a broad topic, but you probably have things in place how to develop the leaders within your company. But what about your kids? Like, I think that the home is like the best leadership development opportunity ever, that's sometimes overlooked. Or what about your company culture? You've probably had discussions at length about the culture that you want to create in your company or your business. But what about the culture in your home? Have you ever considered what culture you're creating in your home? And so the Family Brand Academy, the Family Brand System, gives you processes to have those conversations and have like discover those outcomes. Like, what are your mission, your family mission, your vision, your values, your culture, etc.
It's so interesting, you know, every business on their website, you know, like front page or on their about page, it says their core values, right? And it lines it out and lists it out. And how many families have core values that they align with and talk about and live to? I would say very few. It's something that we've took on at the Kinetic Man, that we talk about early on as members. You know, what is your personal core values? What are your family core values? So I'm curious, like, how do you guide families through that? And then how do you use that? How do you recommend using family core values to live out, you know, a daily life within the family?
Yes. Okay. So it's been a journey. We started talking about Family Brand probably in 2017, I want to say. And so Family Brand 1.0, we developed a program and we told families, okay, you need to have family values, go develop your family values and like come back and report. And it would work for some families, and for other families, they would come back. One family in particular, I remember saying like, the husband and wife came back and they were saying, we're fighting about our family values. We have 17 of them. We don't know how to like whittle them down. Like, please help us. And we were like, oh no, we're like destroying families in an effort to help families. And so we realized, okay, can we systematize this? Is there something that we can do to make this easier for families? So currently we actually do have a system for families. If a family comes to us and they're like, we already have family values, we're not going to like try and make them change what they already have. But if they're like, we just want a system, we actually found incredible research. It's important to me that everything that we do and preach is evidence-based, research-based. So we found some really cool research out of the University of Nebraska, where they studied families. And the research is super cool because it talks about, the premise of the research was that so much research had been done about what causes families to break down, but not a lot of research had been done about what makes families strong. And so that was like the starting point of the research, is how do we identify strong families and what makes up a strong family? And so it was this research project over, I think, 34 years, 24,000 family members. I want to say hundreds of countries all over the world. So it was a very robust study, and they narrowed it down to that there's 7 values that strong families possess. And so we basically help families take these research-based values. Like one of them is strong families prioritize their family. So how can you develop a family value around prioritizing your family? Another one is strong families, they talk and they communicate. So let's help you develop a family value around how are you going to communicate? What does that look like for your family? Another one is resilience. Let's develop a family value around resilience, whether that's grit or, you know, whatever you choose, however you choose to express that in your family. But it's a very easy system for families to create family values that are really meaningful, that have some research behind them too, that, okay, this is going to lead us to be a stronger family. And then from there, the second part of your question was, well, what do you do with them? Like you have your family values, like now what? We actually have what we call the family brand blueprint inside of the Family Brand Academy. And it does tell you exactly like, okay, what do we do with these daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually? So it becomes not just these things on the wall, which is actually one of the first things we tell families to do, like get your family values up on your wall so you can see them, repeat them. But it's something like inside of you, and it's shaping you and your family. And I think that that's maybe the most important thing right off that we tell families what to do with them, is get them on your wall and start talking about them. You know, when you have opportunities with your kids, I think it's so important to say, like we have a family right now in our Family Brand Academy. She shared with us on our last call that her little son had to speak. He was asked to speak in church, and he was like really nervous about it. And she remembered like, oh, we've just developed a family value. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it was basically about being brave. And she was able to like use that a language in conversation with him and remind him of who he is and who he wants to be. Like, and then he was able to, she was like actually even surprised that it worked. She's like, I can't believe that he did this, but he did, he got up and he spoke and he did what he wanted to do. But it was like a lot of that reinforcing of the family values in everyday conversation that I think really helps and is one of the best ways to use your family values.
That's awesome. David, before I know you have a question, but I would just comment on your Instagram page. I love some of the stuff that you've like put up, for your wall of family values and ideas there. You have like the different tiles for each family core value. And I think it's really, really cool. I've actually shown my wife, and she's kind of artistic, and she's like, oh yeah, let's do that. So it's like we're coming up with something similar. But it's super cool just to see that and have something on the wall that kind of just posts your family brand, your family core values. David, I know you have an amazing question.
Yeah, no, naturally, always amazing questions.
Always amazing.
Always amazing. Well, and so you on the website, it talks about the program, and there's different iterations or not different iterations, but different options of the program, whether it's the virtual, in person, or the private coaching. And I love that you said there's the expectations are a culture, family core values, and a clear vision for your family. And so you just touched on the core values part. I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about the culture? Because I don't think a lot of us think about, I don't think we're super intentional with thinking about what kind of family culture we have. Like we do have a family culture. And it's funny, before this podcast, I was dropping my kids off. I drop off the middle schoolers, and they're all very different. And actually I drop off two other boys who are not in my family, and they leave the car, and I always yell out the window, and I force all of them to acknowledge me and say bye, right? Like even the ones that aren't mine. And my middle guy, Jake, he's walking, and my daughter is like, Dad, don't yell out the window. And I'm like, why do you tell me not to do that? Because you just know, like, that's like fuel for my internal fire and joy, is to embarrass you. But it's funny because she's like that, right? But she'll still give me a kiss and be like, bye, Dad, love you. And then the other boys leave. I'm like, Sean, bye. And he's like, bye, dude. And then the other kid, Owen, I'm like, bye, Owen. And he's deaf. He's like, oh, I don't want to say anything. I'm like, bye, Owen. But my middle guy, the point is Jake. I'm like, bye, Jake, I love you. And he's a kid. He's like, I love you, Dad. Like, he doesn't care. Like, he's got his heart is huge, loves everybody. But my question is, it made me think about this conversation, because I'm like, man, I want to frame a culture around this. Like, I want there to be an aspect of this that is just what we do. And not necessarily from a core value standpoint, but from a cultural point. And I'm just curious, can you highlight a little bit of the process and what you mean by a culture created by design, not default?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we talk about with families is creating a culture of belonging. And this is also some research we found. It was in a book called Value Graphics. We're all the same age now, and it's really a business book, but it said the one human like core value that we all share is belonging. And it's the idea that you will seek out belonging no matter who you are and where you are. Humans crave belonging. And so it's, can we create a culture in our families where every family member feels like they belong and every family member feels like they have a voice? And if they don't feel that, they will seek that somewhere else, whether that's a friend group or a church group or a sports team or, wherever else. But can they feel it in our homes first? Feel that sense of belonging, that they're part of the team, part of the family. And that is easier said than done, of course. But I think part of it is, does everyone have a voice in our family? Does everyone have room to make mistakes and feels like they belong? And a lot of that is like open and honest conversations with each other about that. And I think, like I said, the room to make mistakes and grow together.
It's interesting. My 6-year-old, he's incredibly independent, and he's always wanting kind of to do his own thing and try to do things himself. And my wife has a hard time with that sometimes, to let him do something dangerous or fail, when it's kind of harder than what he can handle. And we're trying to work on this. Something the other night, he was all upset, and he just said, "Mom, you never let me make a decision on my own. You're always telling me what to do." It's like, I want to do it on my own. And just like blurted out, interesting. He wants a voice. He wants, as you're talking through this, like he wants to feel like he belongs. He wants to feel like he has a say. And I think a lot of times as parents, we get into this stage of just, we know what's best. We know, how it's going to end up. Right. And I think that we as parents need to step back a little bit and allow for more failure to happen, allow for them to figure things out on their own, give them that autonomy, give them that voice to stand up for themselves. It's something that we were really working on a lot in our family. But I'm curious, you talk about family meetings a lot, and we've made attempts at family meetings in our house with not really much of a structure. We do one meeting annually that is very successful. It's a giving meeting. We have a donor advised fund that we give to every year, and at the very end of the year, we come together and make a decision on where those funds go, what charities we like, what do we want to support this year, and that always goes well. But the other meetings, kind of like on a more like a weekly basis, sometimes they go okay, sometimes they never happen. There's no like system to it, and from a communication standpoint, you're talking about how do those work? Like, what are your recommendations on meetings? What do you guys do? And how are you checking in with your family on a regular basis? Like, what does that look like?
Yes. So we, it's a little tricky because, like I said, we have a 7-year-old and we have a 17-year-old. So we found that shorter is better.
Yeah.
For both of them. They both appreciate the short
I was gonna say, you need it on both ends of that spectrum.
Yes, but I think the most important thing is the consistency. We've chose a day every week. So for us, Sundays were a good fit, and it's like, okay, we know that every Sunday afternoon we are going to have our family meeting. And there's this cool analogy. It was actually in it's called The 9 Lies About Work by Marcus Buckingham, I believe. He talks about, it's not, he doesn't relate it to parenting, he relates it to work. But again, another cool tie-in, I think, to family is he talks about having check-ins in a team setting at work and why that's so important. And he talks about consistency, and he says you would never do like 3 really thorough toothbrushings a year and feel like, okay, yep, we got this. This is good. He's like, no, the most
Stu only does it twice. Stu does 2 like really good ones, and then the rest of the time.
No, that's good. Like the most effective thing is, even if it's like shorter, but it's like the consistency, and it doesn't have to be like this amazing experience every time, but it's like the consistency and the rhythm of it. And so I actually really love that analogy for family meetings, because oftentimes it does feel like maybe a complete failure because I took this picture of our family meeting once, and it was like, we have a couple of dogs. So like the dogs were in the middle of it, and someone was like standing on their head, and someone else was like kicking a soccer ball. And at a glance, this was looking like the most ineffective meeting. And maybe it was, but I think it's the consistency and also the intention. Like, we want to come together. We want to communicate. We want to, have this be a rhythm for our family. And those rhythms are super important in families as you're developing family culture. And where we've gotten with it is we just have four like not even questions, but four little sections within the meeting. And we start with, what's something that you're grateful for this week? Who in the family did something kind for you? We review our calendar, like who needs to go where and what do we have, kind of out of the ordinary this week. And then we talk about the question is who in the family has a problem that they would like help solving. And it's this kind of mastermind approach to the family. And how can we help? How can we support each other? Do we have something that we could jam on together and help each other?
That's cool.
And I think the fact that you could take a picture, as chaotic as it might have been, of a family meeting, just that in and of itself, right? The fact that there is a scheduled, consistent, intentional gathering of your family is very unique. And I think it's an action step that is could be so critical for just growth in the family and the interrelational dynamics and all of that. Because I think the effort, I think we all go into it with an expectation, and our kids haven't necessarily agreed to that, nor has the dog necessarily agreed to that expectation. But there's, I think the fact that there's an opportunity to do that, I love that intention, and it's something that we have wrestled with in our house, and just, so I'm excited about it. Just, I want to highlight the family meetings template. That's a resource on the website, right? That's something that people can go to and they can get that. And that's completely free. That's something that can absolutely change, the dynamic of your family. And so I encourage folks to go to the website and do that. I just want to touch on this third point. We talked about core values. We talked about culture, a clear vision for your family. What does that mean?
I know this one is a little more abstract, but I think that so often I think as families, we just get stuck in the busyness of life. And it's like, okay, what do we have to do this week to get everyone to bed and fed and to practices or whatever it is? We sometimes lose sight of like, but what are our goals and our dreams for our family? What is the kind of family that we want to be? Fast forward 20 years and our old neighbor is talking about us. What do we want them to say about the Gutierrez family or the Grazier family or the Smith family? What do we want to be known for? Who do we want to be? And it's taking the time to get clear on some of that and then backing into it and saying, okay, so what do we need to do to live that out so that in 20 years, that is what we've created for our family.
We had another guest on our podcast. His name's Adam Tarnow. He wrote a leadership book. It's really good. It's called The Edge. And he mentioned this thing called the cell phone test. And he was aligning it to your personal brand. And when David calls me on the phone, his name pops up on the phone. What do I immediately think about David when his name pops up on the cell phone, right? And we could probably tie that to family in some way too. Like, what do you think about? Who do you think about? If you're going to meet with the Gutierrez family, how does that make you feel? It's an interesting kind of thought process of like, how are other people going to make them, how are they going to feel when they see the Graziers? And it's really starting to rack my brain about brand, the family brand. It's a pretty cool thing to think through. I've noticed on
even just mentioning, like, and I don't know why, but it happened both times when you're talking, Melissa, and you said the Gutierrez family and the Grazier family, and then when Stu just said the Gutierrez family, like there's not even a context or a story tied to that. But when you guys said that, the power of a name, it impacted me. Like I got goosebumps when you said the Gutierrez family. I don't know why, but I think there's an element to your point that you do have a culture, a dynamic, values, you have a vision. It's just, if you're not intentional with it, it either will not manifest to the greatest extent possible, or it's unintentional. People are going to say the Gutierrez, there's going to be something about the Gutierrez family, right? And whether you speak it to us or not to make us aware of it, if we're not intentional with it, it just, like, my mind immediately went to a couple of families who are always like, man, you guys are like our family that we adventure with, right? Like like we don't hang out with a few families a lot, but they invite us on these big trips. And it's not something that it resonated, but it didn't, like, now I want to be very intentional with you speaking that. I want to be very intentional to to lean into that. And what's the reason for that? And why is our family a certain way? And really dive into, okay, how do we manifest that in a way that not only is who we are, but to your point, that makes it an impact that 20 years down the line, someone's gonna be like, man, these are really good memories. These are really good things. Because what you're alluding to is, and I guess what you're saying directly, we have the ability to do that very intentionally. And whether we choose to or not, we're still doing it, right? We're still doing it. They're going to say something about our families, but are we controlling that narrative from the perspective of coming from a place of, I really want this for my family? That's super powerful.
Totally. Yeah, that was beautiful how you just expressed that. And it reminds me of another component that is it's in the Family Brand Academy, that it talks about family history and the power of knowing your family history and knowing like your family name. And there's actually really cool research about identity in kids and children, knowing their family history, not even like the whole family history, but knowing like simple things like where their parents met, like where were their grandparents from. That builds identity and it builds culture, knowing that they're part of something bigger than just themselves. And it builds resilience and it builds strength. And I think that it's something that we've kind of lost. You know, I'm sure we've all heard of, I don't even know when this was most prevalent, but the idea of like family flags and the idea of family crests and this idea of identity in families, it's something that is not a new concept. It's existed for thousands of years, but I think we've kind of lost touch with it. And I think the more that we can connect back to it, I think that we will be so surprised with the strength and the power that comes from that.
Yeah, we have guys in our group that have made family crests from, coming up with their core values, or they have like a family mnemonic they write out, and each letter is tied to a value, and they talk through it. It's pretty cool to see.
Very cool.
I was going to say before you had commented, Melissa, that when we think about the Gutierrez family, if like we're gonna have like a family get together, or like a barbecue or something like that, like the first thing that comes to mind is, Jacob and David are going to eat all of our burgers. They're going to eat us out of house and home. So they're not invited. Hey, last thing before we let you go, I noticed on your website that you have business titles for all of your family, all your kids. The CEO and the biz development and the creator and the people officer and the boss. Do you include them into your business? Do you include them into actual roles in the family business? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's funny. Just this morning, my husband and I were just talking about updating the website because those pictures are a little bit outdated. We do not like in that actual way. Like, I even forget the titles that I have on the website for the kids, but it is important to me that we are developing them. Like I mentioned, the leadership development opportunity. I want to give them every opportunity that they can to develop like as leaders. And for us, that looks like supporting them in their goals and dreams, but it also looks like some funny things like just last night have you ever heard of Toastmasters, the like public speaking? Yep. Okay. So we have what's called Smith Masters. And it's like, how can we develop our kids as people who can speak and people who can convey messages and ideas and speak with conviction and power, and that will serve them like wherever they go, whatever like, opportunity. And so it's just this funny little thing that we do where we assign a topic and we take turns getting up in front of the room, and they speak for like, usually we set a timer, it's like 2 minutes, speak for 2 minutes on your favorite animal and why, or just, that's just one example of just something funny. But so not necessarily in the business, but it's like always on the back of my mind, how can I continue to develop my kids as leaders?
I love that. It's so interesting that you're saying that, because my daughter, she's 9. She had to do a book report this week, and she had to do a 2-minute oral presentation on her book and her project. And so all weekend long, we did that exact same thing. Like we had her stand up, she made a little note, like she wanted to just basically hold her paper up and read it. And we're like, nope, not going to happen. This is how you do oral presentation. You can make little note cards, you can look at them, but you're going to, look people in the eye. You're going to have your hands behind your back. You're not going to be fiddling. You're not going to say, and we practice it over and over again. And then she volunteered this week to be the first in her class to go And she's like, Dad, I killed it. And I can see
I
that's
bet
what you,
she did. Yeah.
and then my wife was like, you know what? We should like teach kids how to do that because nowadays that's all they should. And Colin, she's like, yeah, every other kid just read their paper without looking at anybody. And I was like, yeah, nice job. So I love that.
Yeah, good job to you. And it's a skill that will serve her no matter
Mm.
what she decides to do, the rest of her life or where
Yeah.
she lands.
Well,
That's
more
good.
than the titles, what I loved is with each of your kids, you put characteristics of them. So like, for I don't know, I'll just pick one. For Tanner, you said intuitive, tender, influencer, and then sports, specifically football fanatic. But the idea of the intuitive, the tender, the tender, the influencer, those things being identities that you're speaking into that you're also supporting and speaking to your kids. So I love that aspect of it. So that was a cool set. Both Stu and I had a comment like, oh, I love this section with the kids and just how, what stuck out to me was, were the descriptors and just knowing your kids and how unique and different they are. Right. And speaking life into that. So that was a cool, love that. Stu's just, I can read between the lines of Stu. He was just looking if you guys actually used your kids because he wants to pay his kids to get tax breaks. Like that's really what Stu's intent behind that question was.
Already
Hey,
do.
give me the strategies on how I can fill my kids' Roth IRA legally and all that kind of stuff.
Already do.
Yeah, I know. This was I just looked at the time and realized we have to honor your time too. But this was a fascinating conversation. I love I have a page of notes. I don't know if I've taken this many notes for a podcast that we've had for a while, just because of the importance of the intentionality and really the long-term impact. And even this simple thing, like, I wrote the Goody Masters, right? I'm taking a note, like, how do we incorporate this into our family? Because it's also very practical. It's intentional. It's edifying to the kids. It's in direct alignment with us as parents trying to develop our families, and all these things are. And it really sets the stage and the foundation for what I hope, how intentional I hope my kids are even better. My kids are 7, 11, and 13 at this point, and I'm starting a lot of these things in the last couple of years. I would love for my kids to leave the house and be like, hey, we're going to, as soon as I get married, I'm going to develop core values. Like what a difference that would make. Or
Yeah.
before I get married, I'm going to have core values that I understand so that when I'm choosing my spouse, that we're in alignment at a deeper level, right? Like I think this stuff has generational impacts that will far exceed any monetary inheritance or anything else that we can give our kids materially. This stuff will pay way more dividends and has a much higher ROI. So I commend you on the businesses you're running. I commend you on the efforts of discovering the lady boss that you are and taking this business over and really just refining it, but also to the service and the benefit of generations that you'll never even see the scope of the impact on what you guys are doing, which is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Melissa, where do we send people? How do people find out more about Family Brand? How do they get the family meeting guide and the check-in guide? What do we put in the show notes?
I would just send everyone to familybrand.com/meeting, and that will get you that family meeting guide. And then you can explore from the website from there, whether it's the podcast or the program or anything like that.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for coming on. This was a fun conversation. We'll put that in the show notes. Guys and gals, check out Melissa, check out Family Brand. She's got some great content on Instagram. Website's super cool. Podcast is awesome. Go check it out. It will make your day better. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you, Melissa.